I welcome you again to this session wherein we shall be looking at global politics. In the previous sessions, we looked at the introduction wherein we saw different aspects of the Bible that point clearly to the fact that we are in the end time. In the last session, we looked at an aspect, and that was global religion. Now we're looking at global politics. Well, let us pray. Father in heaven, it is your will that we should not be ignorant of that which is happening around us, in us, and with us. We ask, oh Father, that you will continue that which you've already started doing in opening our eyes to the reality of the end times. We ask that this session shall also accomplish your will and your purpose. In Jesus' name, amen. Revelation chapter 19, from verse 19, it says, "Then I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against the rider on the horse and his army. But the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet, who had performed the miraculous signs on his behalf. With these signs he had deluded those who had received the mark of the beast and worshipped his image. The two of them were thrown alive into the fiery lake of burning sulfur." Continuing again in chapter 6 of Revelations, verse 15, it said, "Then the kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich, the mighty, and every slave and every free man hid in caves and among the rocks of the mountains. They called to the mountains and the rocks, 'Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand?'" When we look at these passages, still again from that implied in Revelation chapter 16, verse 16, which said, "Then they gathered the kings together to the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon." Looking at all these passages, we find the key highlighted words there: the kings of the earth, the princes, the leaders of the armies, the generals, and all this implies a political formation that in the end time will be taking a stand against the Lord and against what he stands for. To give us a clear understanding of the reality of this, there is a biblical prophecy that we find in the Psalms, and that is in Psalm number 2, from verse 1. It says, "Why do the heathen rage, and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, Let us break their bands asunder, and cast away their cords from us. Be wise now, therefore, O ye kings, be instructed, ye judges of the earth." That is verse 10. Looking at this passage of the psalm, scholars and theologians have agreed together that this psalm has a messianic content. This psalm is referring to Jesus in the end of days. And it said, "Why do the heathen rage?" Who are the heathen? The heathen in the Hebrew context are people that are outside the covenant of Yahweh. The people that do not have recognition and do not have the identity of the Jews as established by circumcision in the covenant agreement entered between Jehovah and Abraham. The Bible said, "Why do the heathen rage, and the people imagine a vain thing?" The understanding is that the people being talked about are still the heathen. But when the Bible said the people, it's giving us the implication that it's a multitude. What does it mean to rage? Rage is an expression of anger in a violent way. He said, "Why do the heathen rage, and the people imagine?" Why do they plot? Why do they conspire? Why do they think a vain thing? Who are these people that are involved in this plot? Verse 2 and 10 give us an idea. Verse 2 says, "The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, Let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us." The second lesson we pick from there is the motive of this gathering. The kings of the earth set themselves, put themselves, appoint themselves, arrange themselves, and the rulers take counsel against the Lord and against his anointed. Again, we see this passage going hand in hand with the understanding we had in Luke chapter 19, where they sent a message after the Lord saying, "This man will not be our king." Here again, they are taking counsel against the Lord and against his anointed. The Lord has gone, as we have it today. He has ascended, he has gone to heaven. Who are they showing this rage unto? It's to the anointed, to the followers of the Lord. Who are the people involved in taking this counsel? Verse 2 give us the names: the kings of the earth, the rulers of the earth, and verse 10 included the judges of the earth. In democracy, as taught in the high schools, the three arms of democracy are supposed to be the executive arm, the legislative arm, the judiciary arm. If we translate it to the Bible language, if we use Nigeria for instance, who is the head of the executive? That is the president or the presidency. The legislative, we're talking about the houses of assembly and representatives. The judiciary, these are the judges, just as we also have in Nigeria. So if we translate these to the Bible language, we can say the executive in Nigeria could also be spoken of in the Bible as the kings. Those that the Bible refers to as the rulers are also what here we know as the legislative, for they make the rules and they sanction the rules. Then the judiciary, as we know them in democracy, is what the Bible calls the judges. So looking at Psalm number 2, we see a presentation of an arrangement, a system of government that will take a stand against the Lord and against his anointed. In talking about democracy, it has been said, the United States democratic reform, they said the country's laws are written by the legislative branch, approved by the President of the United States, and subject to interpretation by the judicial branch. Clearly in this particular statement, we see that the three arms are brought out, and these three arms were x-rayed in Psalm number 2. So Psalm number 2, though written hundreds of years before our time, written millennia before our time, clearly portrayed a system of government that the devil is going to take advantage of, and which will be used to mobilize the people to take a stand against the Lord and against his anointed. We laid a foundation in the previous study wherein we looked at Nimrod and what he started in Genesis chapter 11, wherein he gathered the whole world together as one. If you recall, we said in Genesis chapter 10 verse 9, in describing Nimrod, he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That is why it is said like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. And verse 10 said the first centers of his kingdom were Babylon, Erech, Akkad, Calneh, and Shinar. So the Bible implied clearly in verse 10 that Nimrod had a kingdom. He established a kingdom, implying that he was a ruler. In gathering the whole world together as one, as implied in Genesis chapter 11, he was also gathering them under one political system. And that is what we need to understand clearly in knowing the end times. Because in understanding global trends, we have said that right from that time, though God scattered the languages, God did not scatter the ideas. So we find in different cultures all over the world the establishment of the fact that there was a time that the world was under the authority of a single ruler. And since then, the mystery cult have been existing, passing themselves through generations, establishing themselves among the power brokers of the world, with the aim that a time will come they will still be able to gather the whole world together under one single leadership, as illustrated by this symbol, wherein you have the pyramid, the uncompleted pyramid representing the Tower of Babel, and then you have the eye, you have the single point that is supposed to cap it at the top, represented by the eye or the sun, which they clearly say that is going to be the man that will eventually hold the allegiance of the people of the world. In the last study, we saw the meaning of the obelisk, which we said is a hidden symbol for the worship of the sun god Amun-Ra in Egypt. We saw it being used in Babylon, as here in this picture, and then we traced it also being one of those obelisks that was taken from the land of Egypt and taken to Rome, which was placed at St. Peter's Square right in the courtyard, just as illustrated here as seen in the picture. For us to understand the issue of global politics, we will still find another obelisk which we are going to trace and find it being relevant within the global political platform, but we will find that later in the study. So for us to understand global politics in terms of the things that are happening, global trends, we need to first of all understand the democratization of the nations, understanding that democracy has been a tool prophesied in the Bible to be a platform, a system of government that will be used to mobilize the people of the world against the Lord and against his anointed. The second thing we'll need to understand in this presentation will be the Middle East situation, because the Middle East is going to be a political catalyst for what will eventually lead to a crescendo in the end time. Then the last thing we'll also understand today will be the United Nations, the role of the United Nations, the situation, the policies, and the role of the United Nations. Starting with that of democracy. To gain the tool that has led to the structure that we have today, we must go back to Jerusalem. For many things began in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is symbolic to God in many things, and especially in eschatological teachings. In 1 Kings chapter 7, beginning to read at verse 13, when Solomon was about to build the temple, we read that King Solomon sent to Tyre and brought Huram, whose mother was a widow from the tribe of Naphtali, and whose father was a man of Tyre and a craftsman in bronze. Huram was highly skilled and experienced in all kinds of bronze work. He came to King Solomon and did all the work assigned to him. He cast 2 bronze pillars, each 18 cubits high and 12 cubits around by line. Verse 22 said, the capitals on top were in the shape of lilies, and so the works on the pillars were completed. We know how King Solomon was involved in building the temple, that which his father David could not do, for the Lord had said that the hands of David were stained with blood. God granted Solomon favor and mobilized the whole nation surrounding him to bring gifts that were needed for the building of the temple, to add to that which his father David had gathered in his conquest of the nations. But here we read that Solomon sent to Tyre of Sidon, and brought Huram. Tyre of Sidon is still within that area that used to be known as Canaan. And he brought Huram. Who was Huram? Historical documents also called him Huram Abi, the man that he sent. Huram was a skilled man, a mason, a man that was highly skilled in all kinds of bronze work and building. He brought Huram to help out with some of the things in the temple, and Huram it was that casted the 2 bronze pillars that were in the temple, Jason and Boaz. A band of the cult of Huram were still existing right there in Jerusalem. And with this we'll understand what the Bible meant in the book of Ezekiel, when Ezekiel said that the Lord took him into the temple and showed him a few people who were facing the east and were bowing down to the sun, though they were temple workers, but they were bowing down to the sun god. And these have been the root that started off the Knights Templar, the Knights of the Temple. They gained the name the Knights of the Temple years after Jesus died and ascended, when they requested for permission from the Pope so they could assist pilgrims that were coming to Jerusalem, pay allegiance to God. They asked that they could be granted the opportunity to render their service unto the church by granting safe passage unto the pilgrims, and they adopted the name the Knights Templar, or the Poor Knights of Christ, as seen in this particular picture. They gained prominence and they were called the Knights Templar. They eventually established their authority and their network of operations within Jerusalem and within Europe. It has also been said that these people were the ones that devised the system that eventually evolved to the modern banking method as we have it today, because then they allowed pilgrims to deposit their monies and their treasures right there at Europe, and then they were given documents to prove that which they had given. They were granted safe passage to come to Jerusalem. When they get to Jerusalem, they were to meet the Knights Templar, present the documents, and they were given the monies for which they had paid, and a deduction or a commission was removed, which eventually brought out the modern system for loaning in the banks today, or transaction and bank transfer. Historical documents have it that the Knights Templar were actually very wealthy, and that in 13th October 1307, King Philip IV and Pope Clement V had them arrested and had them killed. It was allegedly said that reports had reached the Pope at that time that they were involved in satanic worship, that they were worshippers of the Baphomet, a form of satanism that existed at that time. And Pope Clement was very furious with that. King Philip, who had collected so much money from them in terms of loan, and had realized that he himself was now in bondage to these people whom he owed, sought that as an opportunity to also have them eliminated and taken out of the way. These marked the way they were arrested, and King Philip had them killed on 13th October 1307 when a widespread massacre of the Knights Templar took place. This very day marked the beginning of the Halloween celebration as we have it today, celebrated on 13th of October, and also marked the fearful approach, the fearful attitude to number 13, as we see that even in some hotel rooms, room numbers 13 are not occupied. The Knights Templar disappeared publicly, but historical documents have it that this man, Reverend Theophilus de Saquilas, who was also one of them and sympathetic to their cause, was able to take the things that belonged to them and a lot of their treasures and a lot of their books on rituals, policies and procedures, and took them, migrated with them to England. Right there in England, where he was serving in the courtyard of St. Paul's Church in England, Reverend Theophilus de Saquilas, who was the curate at St. Paul's Church, right there in the vestry with some other people who had escaped the widespread manslaughter, there they changed the name and adopted a new one called the Freemasons. They adopted the name the Freemasons. Looking at the two words that make up that compound word, the Freemasons, we find free and mason. Free, that is freedom, liberty, while mason is a builder, somebody that is building. If we pause a little bit, we now remember Freemasons. Was there a time that man sought to be free to build what he wanted to build? The only time we have a reference of such in the Bible was at the time of the Tower of Babel in Genesis chapter 11. So the Freemasons eventually took off in England, and England became the grand center, the grand headquarters of the Freemasons, where the Grand Lodge was established. So today, though we find the lodges of the Freemasons all over the world where they are operating, first of all, we can always trace their allegiance to the authority of the headquarters in London. And secondly, we also find them having a claim, and that is why many of them have been able to infiltrate the church, for they claim that King Solomon started it, in the sense that King Solomon was the one that brought in Hiram Abi and granted him access to the things of the temple. And that is why, as you see in this picture, in the Grand Lodge of Egypt, the two pillars which mark every Masonic temple, they always put the two pillars, just as we also had them at the front of the Temple of Solomon. So any Grand Lodge, any lodge we have all over the world, as in this particular certificate that gave freedom of authority for the lodge in Egypt, it said, the United Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Masons of England, to all whom it may concern. This is to certify that the bearer, who has signed his name in the margin, was regularly appointed the District Grand Standard Bearer of the District Grand Lodge of Egypt and the Sudan on the 29th day of March, and then the year was given with their own symbol, and in 1946. In testimony whereof we have subscribed our names at Cairo on the 29th day of March 1946. But we can see that the certificate itself is coming from the United Grand Lodge of the Free and Accepted Masons of England. Today we find the Masons in the church. They are within the Orthodox churches, they are within the mainline churches, you find them within the Anglican Church, you find them within the Roman Catholic Church, as seen in this particular picture where a Roman Catholic cardinal is taking a photo with two members of the Freemasons after a Masonic meeting. Here we find the regalia of the Freemasons. We find a man adorned with this regalia, and of course when we look at the bag-like regalia, we can see the symbol of the sun god right there at the front. George Ragheb Idris of Egypt, we find him in his full cloth of the Freemasons, his full regalia, his full uniform. Here again we find him presented an apprentice who is being initiated. For somebody that is coming in to join, is first of all known as apprentice. Here he has a noose around his neck, and he has a sharp thing being made threateningly to pierce his heart, in order for him to take the oath of secrecy, the oath of keeping and abiding by the terms of the Freemasons. The Freemason, in terms of its operation, has clearly proved itself to be a cult, just as we see that it has its own esoteric aspects which are not open to the general public. The Freemason, as we have as shown in this particular place, in the Masonic pyramid, they claim that it is a para-Christian organization, but they claim that the worship is for the grand architect of the universe. And who is the grand architect of the universe? Here we see the 13 levels of the Freemasons, which starts at the bottom with Catholic and Protestant liberalism, British Israelism, Pro-Masons, the Blue Lodge, the White Masonry, the York Rite, the Scottish Rite, Communism, the Grand Orient, B Rite, the 300 level, the 33 level, and the 13 level. And we can also see that those who have reached up to the level of the Grand Orient, going up to the level of the 13, could also qualify to come into an inner organization that is within the Freemasons called the Illuminati. This we shall see subsequently. The Freemasons operate in terms of the 13 levels, but they have 33 degrees of membership, 33 degrees of ascension in terms of membership. And it starts at the bottom with the entered apprentice, the fellow craft, the master mason, the secret master, the perfect master, the intimate secretary, the personal grand judge, the intendant of the builder, going right up to the time until we find the sovereign grand inspector general, which is the 33rd rank of the Freemasons. And the fearful thing is that we have people who are in all these within the church. Tracing within the Freemasons, this is the symbol of the Freemasons, the two main logo of the Freemasons, and that is the compass and the square. These are instruments of building as we know them in our world today. Still trying to trace and knowing how democratization has become a reality in our world today, we must understand how these people had a strong influence on the United States of America. In the 15th century, the explorer Christopher Columbus went out in search of new lands and eventually came into the new land. So many nations at that time wanted to go in to colonize this new great land, and efforts that were made, attempts, competition with rivalry, eventually Britain was able to colonize this new land. And as we see here, the British colonies expanded beyond those ones that we had known before in some other parts of the world. America and North America, including Canada, were now included. But the British that were going in to colonize America, from the historical documents on the ground, they didn't just go without those things that were also known about them in London and in England. So the Freemasons had a very good opportunity to establish their presence very early in the United States. And eventually the cult that was started up in that particular place took up this logo, just as you find it here, which we are going to explain in this particular teaching. In this photo we find, as presented by the Daily News, 19th of September 1993 in the Associated Press. It was titled "The Capitol Cornerstone Turns 200. Here we find Senator Strom Thurmond spreading cement on a reproduction of the United States Capitol cornerstone during a ceremony on a Saturday marking the laying of the stone 200 years ago. But when we look at the picture, we find the Capitol building behind it, and we find these people that are laying the foundation stone. But when you look at the stone clearly, you'll find, though it's been blocked by one of the arms of these poles, we find the symbol of the Freemasons, we find the compass and the square being put there clearly. And it has also been alleged that many of the presidents of the United States have always been running and prominent members of the Freemasons. Especially the first president, George Washington, was a member of the Freemasons. Just as you also find people have accused that in this picture here, the statue of George Washington was made to pose in the same way as that of the Baphomet, as you find on the right. George Washington here is in his regalia of the Freemasons. So the land that was founded was named the land of freedom, the land of liberty. This is good when we think of human rights. This is good when we think of equality. But we remember again that another kind of freedom was implied in Psalm number 2, wherein they said, "Let us cast their bands away from us, and let us turn their chains away from us." When the Bible told us about the kings, the rulers, and the judges that took counsel against the Lord and against his anointed. No wonder that in the hidden world, the goddess Liberta had been worshipped for liberty. Liberta had been worshipped for liberty, and then eventually this icon that is so prominent as you approach New York from the Ellis Island, you find the Statue of Liberty. The Statue of Liberty was set up August 28, 1886. But this Statue of Liberty was actually designed by the French sculptor Frederick Auguste Bartholdi. And in this stamp that was done to his honor, we can see below at the right side of the stamp, you find the symbol of the Freemasons, you find the compass and the square. Remember, we had talked about the obelisk, portraying it clearly as a hidden symbol. And here we find the obelisk here, that's with the Washington Monument, 555 feet high, built by Masons. And here we find as the Washington Monument, a wonderful relic. A man called Doc McKee had claimed that he was a member of the Freemasons, and that he had also risen to one of the inner societies that was also formed by the Freemasons called the Illuminati. He claimed that at a particular point in their meeting, in our session with them, they had been shown the origins of the United States in terms of the influence of the Freemasons, and that they were made to know that George Washington, when he was setting up the GRA, the Government Reserved Area, which is the central Washington DC as we have it today, brought up a Masonic man, and that was architect Charles L'Infante. He was the one that designed the streets of Washington DC, but that the key government buildings were made to bring out the symbols of the Freemasons, that these were deliberately done. So we find, as in this particular picture, you'll find over there, you'll find the Jefferson Memorial, then you'll find it lining up in a straight line with the obelisk, and then lining up in a straight line with the Capitol building. He said these things were deliberate. In the last teaching, we looked at the crescent moon and the star, the moon representing Diana and the star representing Lucifer among the Satanists. The star is always the pentacle. The pentacle is portrayed with the bottom pointing downwards, as seen in this particular picture. What it stands for is the goat head, the Baphomet. The points up represent the horn, the ones by the side representing the ear, and then the one below representing the mouth. Among the Satanists, when they portray the Baphomet as seen in this particular photo, you find that the bottom representing the mouth, but opposite the bottom is supposed to be a candle, which is supposed to be the position representing the intelligence, while out of the mouth the intelligence speaks forth, just as seen in this particular picture. And that is what was meant when Anthony LaVey, the satanic high priest, the man that wrote the Satanic Bible, as seen in this particular cover of the Satanic Bible, you find him fixing his head in the position of the pentacle, so that the horns line up on his head, the ears line up on the sides of his head, while his mouth therefore drops at the bottom point of the pentacle, implying that he is the spokesperson of Satan, as also seen clearly in these covers of the Satanic Bible written by Anton Szandor LaVey. This is Anton LaVey, and he had lived all his life clearly as the spokesman of Satan. Today, his position had been taken over after he died by Reverend Peter Gilmore, who is the present vicar of the Church of Satan. So even in the album cover of the satanic rock band Venom, we find them presenting clearly the mouth of the Baphomet, the mouth of the goat head, being at the bottom of the pentacle. And when we look at the pentacle, we find the 5 pointed sides. By the time we link them up inside, we get the 5-sided figure that in mathematics is called the pentagon. And again, the Freemasons have claimed that in designing the Pentagon, the highest military intelligence building all over the world, the highest single office building all over the world, was designed deliberately as claimed by the Freemasons, as seen in this particular picture. What Doc McKee revealed was that key government buildings were designed such that when lines were drawn to link them up, the symbols of the Freemasons were going to be brought out, as shown in this layout of the streets of Washington DC, with the key buildings being linked up. When we look at the key buildings on this particular side, we find that when lines are drawn from this point, coming right down to the Jefferson Memorial, and then down to the National Gallery of Art, and then to this side is supposed to represent the square, while here is supposed to represent the Capitol building. The roundness of it was supposed to be the roundness of the compass, and then it goes right there to the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, and then while this line goes straight to the White House. But you will see in this particular picture that the Capitol building, the obelisk, and the Lincoln Memorial line up in a straight line, while the Jefferson Memorial, the same obelisk, and the White House line up in a straight line. But at this particular point where the White House is, if we pick out the key positions that are here, you find the pentacle being brought out significantly, And what are those points that are supposed to be there? We find here the DuPont Circle, we find here the Logan Square, we find here the Mount Vernon Square, we find here the Washington Circle, while the place that is supposed to represent the bottom of the pentacle is the White House. But if we have seen the way the Baphomet is being presented among the Satanists, we also know that what is supposed to be above should be the position for the candle, just as the Freemasons have revered number 13 as a sacred number within the Freemasons, as a secret number within the Freemasons. We find that if we count 13 blocks from the White House upwards, we go 13 upwards, we will reach a point at this particular side which is supposed to be where the candle should be. And what building do we find there? We find the House of the Temple, the United States national headquarters of the Freemasons. This is the House of the Temple. And the House of the Temple, as we have it with this picture that you're seeing, that's the place where the Sphinx was put in the House of the Temple. It's implying that while the intelligence is coming from the House of the Temple, that the White House will also be the spokesperson. The House of the Temple was designed in the shape and the format of the mausoleum of the Halicarnassus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and that was the temple of the sun god as at that time. Documents have shown clearly of several United States presidents who had been active Masonists. George Washington was in 1753. From documents of the Freemasons, some of the presidents of the United States that have their own dates of serving within the Freemasons: James Monroe served as a Master Mason in 1776. George Washington served as a Master Mason in 1753. Andrew Jackson served as a Master Mason in 1800. James K. Polk served as a Master Mason in 1820. James Buchanan served as a Master Mason in 1817. Andrew Johnson served as a Master Mason in 1851. William McKinley served as a Master Mason in 1865. Theodore Roosevelt served as a Master Mason in 1901. William Taft served as a Master Mason in 1901. Warren Harding served as a Master Mason in 1920. Franklin Roosevelt served as a Master Mason in 1911. Harry Truman served as a Master Mason in 1909. Gerald Ford served as a Master Mason in 1951, and so are others whom we don't know for now. Benjamin Franklin, one of the notable figures in the United States, was also a Masonist. While the United States citizens were celebrating the freedom from the British colonization, the same year, within the same period, this secret cult was also established in the United States, the Illuminati. The Illuminati was established in 1776, and the Freemasons have claimed that since the 1776, when Illuminati was established, they have claimed that every 13 years, 13 being a sacred number for them, they have established and done one significant thing in the world. They have been behind a particular significant thing that had a global impact. And if we look at from 1776, apart from the fact that the Illuminati was established in 1776, Thomas Paine published the Common Sense, and the Declaration of Independence was done in 1776. The American Revolution, they've claimed they were behind it. 1789, 13 years later, we find the French Revolution, the adoption of the United States Constitution, and the Great Seal. We shall see the Great Seal later. 1802, Washington DC was incorporated, and we have seen how George Washington brought in architect Charles L'Infante to design the key government buildings in the like manner. We have also seen 1815, the Congress of Vienna ends the Napoleonic era. The Convention of Commerce and Navigation was established, and trade with England. The Battle of New Orleans also took place in that year. 1828, Belgium's independence in the Netherlands. The location of The Hague, the future International Court of Justice, was established by the United Nations Charter. 1843, Charles Dickens published A Christmas Carol. The first commercial Christmas card was published, the celebrating of the birth of the sun god. 1853, the Crimean War, Russia against France, Britain, Turkey, and Sardinia over the control of Jerusalem's holy places. We shall also see why today. 1867, Britain and North America Act. United Canada, Alaska was sold to the United States. Then the Society of the Rosicrucians was formed in England. The Rosicrucians works in sympathy with the Freemasons. It's the same organization. 1880, the Presidential Seal and the Coat of Arms was established. Then the Egyptian obelisk was transferred to New York as the Washington Monument, the beginning of the conquest of Africa by European powers. 1893, the Parliament of World Religions was founded. And if we recall in the last teaching, we knew that in 1893 the Parliament of World Religion set off the establishment of the Forum for the One World Religions platform, which eventually the meeting took place a century later in 1993. So here we are finding a link. Here the Freemasons claimed they were also behind it in 1893. In 1906, the bank panic provided excuse to establish the Federal Reserve, the National Education Association Incorporated. 1919, the Treaty of Versailles ended the First World War. The Paris Peace Conference was set up for plans for the CFR. Then the German Workers' Party, the Nazis, was founded. The Progressive Education Association, founded by John Dewey. In 1932, the Zionist 18th Congress established in Jewish Agency for Palestine. Then in 1945, 13 years later, we found the United Nations Charter, the Yalta Conference, the atomic bomb was dropped, the discovery of the Nag Hammadi Library. All these, they were behind it. Symbols are very, very critical, and we have seen the use of symbols in this place. In the Book of Magic, written by Frederick Goodman said, when an occult or esoteric symbol is made in any particular place, which is supposed to be used as a point of contact to manipulate or to harm, he said that once the symbol is made, it takes power on its own. He said the symbol will be more powerful if the victim sees the symbol but has no idea of what it means. He said the symbol will be most powerful if the victim is not even aware that such a symbol exists. And here we see clearly from the revelation of Dr. McKee that the key buildings of the United States in Washington, D.C. were lined up to promote the visions and the activities of the Freemasons. The Freemasons had a strong grip in the foundation and the establishment of the United States of America. The Illuminati that was established in 1776 adopted this for a symbol, and we find the uncompleted pyramid with the top also represented by the all-seeing eye, the all-seeing eye of Amun-Ra. Eventually this logo was picked, and you found this writing Annuit Septis Novus Ordo Seclorum. This is a Latin word meaning announcing the birth of the new world secular order. At the bottom of the pyramid we found those letters MD, CCL, XXVI. These in Roman numerals, M standing for 1,000, D for 500, CC for 100 each meaning 200, L for 50, XX for 1010 meaning 20, V for 5, I for 1. When you add up this figure, you have 1776, which stands for 1776, the same year the United States had its independence. So we know what this logo stands for, the logo of the Illuminati. And we are not surprised here in Nigeria that the fraternity of Ogboni picked the same logo, though they put two eyes, and they say, behold how good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. But in not being deceived, we know clearly that Ogboni operates as a cult. This clearly implies that Ogboni is a society to be dreaded. It was duly registered and issued a certificate of incorporation on 17 June 1943. The Constitution of the Reformed Ogboni Fraternity Incorporated lists its aims and objectives as one, to associate for the promotion of the principles of the universal fatherhood of God, the all-seeing eye. But we know where the all-seeing eye is from. This is the all-seeing eye, the symbol of the Freemasons, which dates back to what happened in Genesis chapter 11. But the people, the members of Ogboni, have picked it as in objective number 1, the promotion of the principle of universal fatherhood of God, the all-seeing eye. We know clearly that it is not the same God we are talking about. And then the universal brotherhood of man, without any discrimination of race, color, creed, sex, religion, or political affiliation. The Reformed Ogboni fraternity is anything clean, holy, transparent, and honorable. It doesn't have anything to do with the use of fetish means. That's what they are saying, and that it has been the mode of events since that the fraternity was founded in 1914, the same year that Nigeria was amalgamated by an Anglican archdeacon, late Thomas Adeshina Jacobson Ogumbiyi. In number 4, among their articles, they say that it is to see the mortal remains of any deceased member by providing a coffin up to a reasonable limited cost and to give his or her remains a decent deposit in the bosom of Mother Earth. But we are not to be deceived in knowing clearly, especially knowing that the meaning of that statement, Annuit Septus Novus Ordo Seclorum, with the all-seeing eye on it, is announcing the birth of the new world order, an order without God, under the all-seeing eye of the Antichrist, as portrayed in this place. For the person that shall fill that position of the top will be the one that the Bible has described as the Antichrist. The seal that was adopted by the United States, here we find the bird holding the branch of the fig, holding the arrows. And incidentally, is it coincidental that we are finding that the arrows being held are 13 arrows, as seen here? The stripes on the flag are 13. The leaves on the fig branch are 13. The stars on top of the bird are 13. And even the bird, though many have claimed that it is the eagle, the original bird that had been on the seal of the United States had been the phoenix. And the phoenix had been the mythological or legendary bird that lived in Arabia. According to tradition, the phoenix consumed itself by fire every 500 years, and a new young phoenix sprang from its ashes. In the mythology of ancient Egypt, the phoenix represented the sun god. The sun dies at night and is reborn in the morning. Among early Christian traditions, they adopted the phoenix as a symbol of both immortality and resurrection. Here we found a confluence between Christianity and heathen worship, as was explained in the last teaching. The mythical phoenix, therefore, had been the bird that was put there. It is therefore not with surprise that we find this badge, which is worn by the Masons, the Freemasons, with the 33 written on it. This is worn as a lapel in the pockets when they wear their full regalia of the Masons. So the phoenix had been the firebird of the Freemasons. Albert Pike here is seen wearing this. Albert Pike is one of the few people that have reached up to the 33 degree among the Freemasons. He wrote a book that is prominent for the operations of the Freemasons. Here, the Masons are spread all over the world. They have established their presence strongly among the political ranks within any country that they have interest in. As we see this man here giving a Masonic greeting, which appears to be as if he is adjusting his ties. They are all over the world, and even in Nigeria, readily identifiable footprints of this Kabbalah in craft Freemasonry. That was a book that was written by W. Chris Aniche Okorafor, the PD District Grand Master, the District Grand Lodge of Nigeria, under the Grand Lodge of Scotland. So they are also here in Nigeria. So why is it important to understand the role of the Freemasons in the origin of America? We need to understand so that we can gain an understanding of how they could take control of the resources of this great land to work for the democratization of the whole world. Democracy in itself has nothing wrong in it, but we remember that the Bible had warned us that the kings, the rulers, and the judges would take counsel against the Lord and his anointed. So the platform for the kings, the rulers, and the judges to operate had to be established, and America was going to play a huge role in it. The second aspect we said we needed to know was the situation of the Middle East. And to link up the Freemasons to the Middle East, a branch of the Freemasons is called the Ancient Noble Order of the Arabs of the Mystic Shrine. And you can find their symbol in this place. You can find the machete or the Arab sword, and then the head of a pharaoh. Then you find the crescent moon with a star, just as seen in this place. These are very wealthy Arabians, but they are members of the Freemasons. This is just a department or a branch of the Freemasons, as portrayed clearly in the uniform that is being worn by this man. As you can see on the top, the symbols of the Freemason, the compass and the square. These are members of this ancient mystical order, and they exist today. As at the 1980s, their population, their number, their membership had already reached more than 1 million, as had been said. Why is it important to understand what is happening in the Middle East? The Middle East is going to be a catalyst for the world politics. The Middle East keeps the world politics in balance. The Middle East is a major player in what happens in the political arena all over the world. Why is there so much tension in the Middle East? It is over one issue. Who was the true legitimate son of Abraham? Who was the rightful heir of Abraham? The Arabs say it is Ishmael. The Jews and many Christians say it is Isaac. Ishmael was the first child of Abraham as recorded in the Bible. But the biblical account gave clearly that God did not intend that through Hagar the heir should come. And later God came and fulfilled his promise to Abraham, and Sarah gave birth to Isaac. It was indicated clearly that God had shown preference to Isaac, and that through him the covenant people were going to be established. But Ishmael had been blessed. Ishmael was going to be a great man. The Bible has said in prophecy, and he shall be a wild donkey of a man, and his hand shall be against everybody, and everybody's hand shall be against him. To understand how Jerusalem eventually came to how it is today, Jesus made a prophecy and told the disciples that asked him what he felt about the beauty of the temple in Jerusalem, the temple of Herod. He told them a time was going to come when no one single block was going to rest on another in the temple. This was fulfilled in AD 70 when Emperor Titus came into Jerusalem and destroyed the entire building and threw out every block, especially when he was told about the gold that was hidden in the blocks, and he wanted everything broken down and melted so he could get the gold out. Then the Jews were scattered and went into diaspora all over the world. Since that time, there had not been in existence the nation of Israel. But we remember that God had also made a promise through the words of the prophet Amos that a time will come when the Lord shall return the children of Israel back to their land. And in his words he said, "And they shall be brought back to the land where no man shall uproot them again." The Zionist movement started gradually within the 20th century, and on 14th May 1948, the United Nations eventually accorded for the establishment of the Jewish nation. 650,000 Jews returned in a cluster and started a nation, surrounded on all sides by antagonist enemies, surrounded up north by Lebanon, which was former Tyre and Sidon, surrounded on the east by the Jordanians, the Iranians, the Syrians, surrounded on the southern side by Egypt in the Sinai Peninsula, and then you also find still on the western side you find the Jordan was there, the Jordanians, and then you now come towards a little bit on the southwest. We found them surrounded by the Palestinians with the Gaza Strip in that side. Then the only other side where there was no land was the Mediterranean Sea. Israel came 650,000 people, and we find people like Moshe Dashan and some other people that came. They established it. Even before it was established, the Arab nations had revolted and declared clearly that they were not going to allow the establishment of the Israeli nation. The establishment of the Israeli nation was fought against by the Arabs. So right within that 1948, the battles and skirmishes started. Israel kept on defending itself. These few people defended themselves, and in 7th January 1949 there was a significant battle that led the Israelites to push back the Arabs a bit and took over from 5,000 square miles. They extended their borders to 8,000 square miles. Since 1949, between 1949 and 1956, the Israelis alone had reported more than 1,000 skirmishes or 1,000 encroachments by the Arab neighbors all around them. These, the United Nations felt, was ridiculous as the number was so high. But we had some significant battles that they have had, as in the one that took place in 1956 when Egypt led the Arab coalitions to attack Israel, and again Israel repelled the attack, though at the cost of heavy casualties. In the 5th of June 1967, the Six-Day War, the popular Six-Day War, started. And this was such that the Arab nations had been in preparation to launch out against Israel. Egypt was being depended upon to lead the Arab nations against the nation of Israel, and the Egyptians were also armed. They were being supplied by the Russians. They had Russian tankers, they had Russian air-to-surface missiles, they had Russian anti-aircraft missiles, and they had Russian rocket launchers, all in their possession. The Russians were equipping them, and to maintain the balance of power, America was also there. It presented its own self in support of Israel. Within the Six-Day War, when the Egyptians were planning to lead a massive strike that was supposed to annihilate Israel totally, for this strike to take place, the Palestinians had to withdraw from the Gaza Strip, wherein the tankers of the Egyptians will move in to strike the death blow unto Israel. The Palestinians that were living with the Israelis left their neighbors, left their homes, left things, and withdrew to allow the Arab neighbors led by Egypt to come in to destroy Israel. Unfortunately, the Israelis struck first, and when the Israeli planes flew low below the radar of Egypt and bombed all the planes of the Egyptians that were right there on the tarmac, Egyptian Air Force was destroyed in a few hours. Without the air support that was needed for the cavalry that was coming in, the Egyptians could not do much. And eventually, within the 6th day, the Jews had been able to take over the Golan Heights from the Syrians. They had been able to take over the West Bank from the Jordanians. They had been able to take over the Sinai Peninsula that moved right into Sinai. They were approaching Cairo to bomb it. And this was made very easy because the Gaza Strip was not occupied. There was no Palestinian resistance, as the Palestinians were not there. The Jews moved freely within that land, and they were going towards Cairo when the United Nations called for the Jews to stop. When we look at the people that fought this battle, the Israelis not having many people, being just a few people, surrounded by massively populated Arab nations, little youths had to be called into active service, as seen in these pictures, wherein you find the Israelis defense members, the tactical defense unit, and most times you find they are youths, young boys and young girls. This picture shows the Gaza Strip actually empty when the Israelis marched right through, because the Palestinians had withdrawn, and in doing this they were able to regain Jerusalem. The control of Jerusalem fell back to Israel after the 6-day war. After the 6-day war, it was reported that about 1,000 Jews died in the battle, but 35,000 Arabs were also killed in the battle. Israel extended its border from 8,000 square miles to 35,000 square miles, as also shown in these pictures. The Palestinians were living in the refugee camps outside, where they had hoped it was going to be a temporary place before Israel would have been annihilated and they would have been able to come back to their lands. Israel, as you see in this picture, extended its border deep into Egyptian territories, took over Palestinian territory, took over the West Bank. The problem now was that now that Egypt had not been able to beat down Israel, and the Arabs had not succeeded in that which they promised the Palestinians returning to find Israel occupying that which belonged to them, demanded it back. But Israel gained control over that place, though eventually Israel gave back to them to allow them to occupy, but the territory was declared Israeli. And the Israelis have declared since that day that they were never going to give back those parcels of land to the Palestinians. This should be understood, and it is still a major reason for the battle as we see it in our world today. After that battle, the Egyptian President Nasser, claimed that it was because of the American support of Israel that the battle was lost. The Arab nations turned against America concerning that battle, and they had an advantage over the United States, and this advantage is in the form of the black gold, oil. America is the highest consumer of oil in the world, but though America produces oil, it doesn't produce enough to serve its needs, and more than 80% of the entire oil deposits in the world lie under Arab soil, as revealed in these particular pictures, wherein we found that the first highest producers of oil is Saudi Arabia, that is Arab, then Iraq, that is Arab, then Kuwait, that is Arab, then Iran, that is Arab, then Abu Dhabi, that is Arab, then Venezuela, which is not Arab, Soviet Union, Mexico, United States, China, then Libya, which is Arab, followed by Nigeria, which is not Arab, Norway, which is not Arab. These are followed by Algeria, which is Arab, then Indonesia, which is non-Arab, India, which is non-Arab, Canada, which is not Arab. Then you have the neutral zone of Kuwait, then you have Qatar, and then you have Egypt. By the time this is summed up, you realize that more than 80% of the entire oil supplied in the world is under Arab soil. So it was easy that after the 6-day war, the Arabs quickly put their heads together and started the oil blackmail in raising the price of the barrel of crude oil. This was in an aim to afflict the allies of Israel. The formation of OPEC therefore was very strategic at that time, especially in view of the fact that one of the laws of OPEC was that in taking elections and in casting votes, in decision taking, the oil producing quota of each nation was also very significant in its strength in making decisions. By the time this is put into position, it will be realized that it appeared that the decision taken for OPEC, turning a balance of the demand and supply of oil all over the world, that these lay clearly in the hands of the Arabs. So the formation of OPEC as an oil cartel was in order to checkmate and to find a stabilizing factor, a blackmailing tool against the allies of the Israelis. In 1973, with the threat of oil blackmail so serious and with oil prices soaring so high, the United States faced one of its highest oil shortages that had ever been since that time. In view of that, they had to withdraw support for Israel. When support for Israel was withdrawn, gradually the nations staged another battle against Israel, and this was in 6th October 1973, the Yom Kippur War. Yom Kippur, which stands for the Day of Atonement, is the highest Jewish holiday, wherein every single Jew, even those in active service, were released to go back and reunite with their families in order to celebrate the Passover. While this celebration was being done, a few days before that same day, the Syrians first attacked. And in attacking, the Syrians struck out with the MiG fighter plane. A Russian fighter plane has been known as one of the most fearful war machines in the air. Highly maneuverable, highly tactical. The only planes that could match the MiG in the air in terms of the acrobatics in the air and fighting skills would be the F-14 and the F-15 of the United States. But as at that time, the Jews only had the Phantom planes, which are slower and which could not be compared to the MiG in anything. But in that battle of that day, the Syrians lost 13 MiGs, while one Phantom plane was shot down of the Israelis. The Arab nations gathered and attacked. And in attacking on Yom Kippur Day, though the battle between the planes of the Syrians and the Arabs and the Jews didn't take place on Yom Kippur Day, but the Arabs retaliated on Yom Kippur Day. And in retaliating on that particular day, Israel suffered a huge casualty because many of the soldiers that were supposed to be active were home having the holiday with their family members. It was reported that the Syrians first struck at the Golan Heights, and overrunning the Golan Heights, right from the Golan Heights, they were shooting missiles into Israel. And within that particular time, Israel was actually being bombed by the Arabs, suffering a huge loss. The United Nations did not stop Arab nations that were attacking Israel. The battle raged for days, and it appeared that Israel really was going to face its end in that battle. But with the turn of the tide, the Israelis were able to mobilize, they were able to station themselves and present a stiff resistance that eventually led again to the recapturing of the Golan Heights. And in capturing back the Golan Heights, they eventually took back the West Bank again. The Gaza Strip was recovered, and from there they moved in. Some commandos and some people went round behind, crossed the Suez Canal, and stood behind the Egyptians who were in the Sinai Peninsula. About 20,000 Egyptians were in the Sinai Peninsula. The Israeli front were coming from the Gaza Strip, moving towards Sinai, while right behind them again, the Israeli commandos that had entered, and these soldiers were trapped in the Sinai Peninsula. Then the United Nations called for Israel to stop. And of course, this time, Israel threatened it was not going to stop until Egypt and the Arab nations signed a pact that they were never going to attack Israel again. This pact was eventually signed when the Egyptian president and the Israeli prime minister were summoned to the Camp David, and there they signed the Camp David Accord. For this signing, the Arabs have not been happy, and some of the Jews were not happy, because part of this terms for signing was that the holy places in Jerusalem were going to be handed over to the Arabs. So the Temple Mount site was handed over to the Arabs so they could have access to the Mosque of Omar and to the Dome of the Rock. These the Israelis conceded. Secondly, they also conceded to hand over the Sinai Peninsula to the Arabs and allow the soldiers who were trapped therein to have access back home. This again the Israelis conceded. And this stirred up anger among some fundamentalist Jews who also retaliated by assassination attempts. Among the Arabs, Anwar al-Sadat, the president of Egypt, was not lucky, because eventually, after the signing of the Camp David Accord, with the hatred that had been stirred up, eventually the assassin succeeded in 1980 when he was assassinated for that. This picture showing the assassination, the two bodyguards turned their guns on the president and they shot him to death. But not before Egypt had signed the Camp David Accord, implying that Egypt was not going to be involved in fighting Israel or leading the Arab nations against Israel again. The Arab nations therefore now have a problem. If Egypt was not going to be there to lead in the battle against Israel, and the Arab nations themselves knew that fighting against Israel on their own one-on-one grounds, they didn't have the hope for victory. And this now gave birth to the terrorist movements as we have them today in the world, the terrorist statics. The formation of the PLO, and the leader of the PLO, Arafat, the late leader of the PLO, who went all over the world and showed the plight of the Palestinian people, gained sympathy for the Palestinian people, which also portrayed Israel in bad light as being unnecessary captors, as being unnecessary domineering, as being racist in taking over the Palestinian territories. But with the efforts of the PLO, the Israeli and Zionist movement was getting more established, because a frontal attack against Israel was not going to be sustained. A man like Ayatollah Khomeini of Iran in the background was also stirring up bad cynicism against Israel. This man had made a statement earlier that there are three things that God created by mistake. He said, one, the mosquito; two, the housefly. He said these two things were created by mistake, for they serve no purpose and are not useful to anybody, that anybody that sees them should kill them. But the third thing he said God created by mistake is the Jew. And just as we kill the mosquito and the housefly, he said that anywhere the Jew is seen, they should be killed. So based on this, we now understand what happens today when the suicide bombers could take over a bus, as in this one in the picture, and kill everybody inside, the students that were being taken to school. It is with this that we understand the motive behind some of the terrorist movements, as that which was done by the Al-Qaeda, as we see of the World Trade Center. And today it has put many of the Muslim nations in a very bad publicity. Because of that, Saddam Hussein, Iran and Iraq had been having a long-standing war, but coming out of it, Saddam Hussein had taken a clear stand against Israel that made him a potential threat. So when the nations also heard about the development of biological weapons, it was therefore without any reluctance that the Americans swooped into Iraq immediately. Today in Iran, we also find that the president of Iran had said clearly that Israel should be taken out of the roadmap. Israel should not exist. The declaration of the non-existence of Israel and the non-recognition of Israel as a nation are all attempts for the Muslim nations to convey their desire for the Jews not to be. It is therefore not surprising, as we find in these particular pictures, children being taught right from early ages to hate the Jews and to hate Zionism. Here they are shooting the flags of Israel. Here the Palestinian youths are demanding for an end to racism in Palestine, for in their own understanding, the presence of Israel within Palestinian territories is racism. Here we find little children with guns, AK-47 rifles, and being taught on how to kill the Jews using every opportunity and every moment they have. It's also the basis for the formation of many of the terrorist groups and the terrorist cells as we have them in the world today. These are little children, and they have been taught to hate the Jews at all times and in all places. for them hating the Jews is progress. And this little child, the gun was been placed before him, because as part of the act of dedication of the child, he is also dedicated that he shall serve actively in promoting the cause of the Palestinians and in fighting the Jews. We find young girls being trained as suicide bombers, young boys being trained as suicide bombers, the different terrorist arms, the Mujahideen, the Al-Qaeda, the Hezbollah, all, and even the Hamas. We find that terrorism became the only tool to be able to fight against the Israelis, as we see today in these pictures. Having had a little understanding of what is going on in the Middle East, we now have to understand what the United Nations stand for, before we now see how the three of them create the platform for the trends of global politics today in the end time. The United Nations was established by the charter that was made in 1945, and the United Nations is sitting on a huge parcel of land in New York that was donated by the Rockefeller family, and the Rockefeller family were clear members of the Freemasons, as have been known. The United Nations building still stands on that place today. The United Nations is the highest platform that organizes the national leadership of every single nation in the whole world. It doesn't have a visible leader, but has a Secretary General, and many have believed that one day the visible leader is going to arise. The two main purposes of the United Nations is peace and security, ensuring the peace and security all over the world. It has the security arm that looks into every issue on the subject of peace and security. The United Nations has three main buildings: the main administrative block, the meditation room, and the conference hall. And it is not surprising that we talked under global religion and showed how the Ark of Gaia has been placed in the meditation room of the United Nations. Daniel warned us concerning the implications of this. In Daniel chapter 8 verse 25, he said, "And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without a hand." In this passage, Daniel was talking about the Antichrist, and he described his activity in the end time as saying that by peace he shall destroy many. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 3, he said, "For when they shall say peace and safety, then a sudden destruction comes upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape." Revelation chapter 6 verse 2 had said, "And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer." If we look at these three passages, peace has been implied, but it is a kind of peace that is able to destroy many. It is a kind of peace that is deceptive, and it is therefore not with surprise Revelation said that it will be a white horse, describing this horse of peace. It's not surprising therefore today that we see so much destabilization of peace all over the world, for the horseman has walked to take away peace from the earth. Different parts of the world at the same time are suffering from political instability, are suffering from things that have thrown the world in turmoil. As in this youth that is carrying a modern rocket launcher in Liberia. The Liberian youths, even in the midst of abject poverty, could still afford these rocket launchers that have been improvised to run with the AK-47 rifle. But where are these arms supplied from? Who gives them these arms? It appears that there is a game that is going on all over the world, wherein behind the scenes, the same people are instigated. The arms sellers sell the arms to them from the West, and then the same people are called upon to come and settle through the United Nations, and then to establish peace through the pressure of the United Nations and the United States. The chariots of the United Nations are painted white. White is the color of the United Nations peacekeeping force, and that in itself is an irony, for peace and force are two words that should not be synonymous. Is it therefore not surprising that the horseman in the book of Revelations was white, and a sword was given unto him to conquer and bent on conquest? And we can see a modern horseman today, the chariots of the United Nations, going out into all parts of the world, being hailed by the masses as we see here in going to establish peace. The meditation room of the United Nations, as we said, the same room wherein the Ark of Gaia has been placed. In the same room, this statue of Osiris has been placed, donated by the Egyptians in 1976. This 2,700-year-old statue of the god Osiris is put in that particular place. And the company that had the contract for maintaining the room, the meditation room, had been Lucy Trust. Lucy Trust was the former Lucifer Publishing Company, which was changed to Lucy Trust in 1922 by Alice Bailey. That was the company that was producing the Lucifer magazine under the Theosophical Monthly, authored by H.B. Blavatsky and Annie Besant, as seen here in these photos. Lucy Trust used to occupy a floor in the United Nations Plaza, but after some bad publicity in the 1980s on them, they now withdrew from the United Nations Plaza, and they today have an office in New York. Lucy Trust also linked hand in hand with Lucent Technologies. So, what is the situation of world politics today? The situation of world politics, first of all, is that the whole world has to be democratized. For that, America was founded. For that, the resources of America was used to ensure and to mount pressure and sanctions on different nations all over the world so that they could have a democracy. Why is it so? Because it has been believed in the understanding of biblical prophecy that democracy was going to be the governmental, the political structure that will bring in the Antichrist. The Antichrist will be a tyrant, yes, but he will be elected democratically, as the nations of the earth are going to cast their own allegiance onto the Antichrist, and they are going to choose him as the person that will lead them out of the economic situation that we are in. Today we find the Jews meeting at the Wailing Wall, where they still keep wailing, waiting that one day God is going to come and redeem Israel. But the situation of the Israelis and the Palestinians is becoming more frantic daily. Why so? Because the Jews have entered a covenant called the Jerusalem Covenant, which was signed, and they said in that particular covenant that never will they give back the Palestinian line. The Bible now says in Revelation chapter 19 from verse 19, "Then I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against the rider on the horse and his army." On what ground will the kings of the earth and their armies gather together? This gathering will be against Israel. But the Bible is implying here that it's the kings, it's a political gathering. It's a gathering of the leaders of the nations. It's a global democratic gathering to annihilate the Jews, to fight Israel. A gathering that will find people trooping right down into the plains of Megiddo to fight the Jews, which will be the battle of Armageddon. What will cause this battle? There are several reasons. Reason number one, we learned it when we looked at global religion, and that will be the refusal of the Jews to join the global religion, the one world religion. They will refuse to be under the influence of the false prophets. They will honor Judaism above any other form of pantheism, above any other form of syncretism, and any other form of interfaithism. That we have looked at the last teaching. The second reason is an economic reason. The Israel today has a major advantage over many nations of the world in the chemicals that are in the Dead Sea, as shown in this photo. The Dead Sea is nearly 7 times as salty as the ocean. The Dead Sea contains, at a depth of 305 meters, that's about 1,000 feet, it contains some 27% solid substances like sodium chloride, magnesium chloride, calcium chloride, potassium chloride, magnesium bromide, and many other substances. By this, the Dead Sea is economically important as a source of potash, bromine, gypsum, salt, and other chemical products, which are extracted inexpensively. Because of the high rate of evaporation, and with the waters depositing these chemicals in this lowest part of the earth, we can find that the chemicals are easily found. The density of the water is so high that a body floats in it, and we can find this man here simply using a shovel to scoop the salt that had been dehydrated from the Dead Sea. The lake is closely associated with biblical history. The sites of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah are believed to lie beneath the lake. The Dead Sea is going to be that for which the nations will find an opportunity to attack Israel. Today, the nation of Israel has many companies that are sustained by this constant supply of chemicals from the Dead Sea. The second reason why Israel will be attacked will be the oil blackmail. How will this come to be? For the oil blackmail to be, we must all recognize that the Arabs operate under Islam as an ummah. Islam is an ummah. It is a brotherhood. As a brotherhood, Islam is still the platform that has the highest potential for cooperation even among all the nations. It is easier for the Islamic nations to rally together as one than for the Christian nations to rally together as one. The oil blackmail will be such that we are noticing today that trade activities are shifting from the United States and moving to the Asian triangle. Trade activities have moved to the manufacturing companies that are moving into China, Japan, South Korea, India, and other parts of Asia, Russia, Belarus, and parts like that. Why so? Because of the cheap labor and because of the movement of money from the European banks to sponsor these activities in these sectors. So the factories in the world today that will have more dire need of oil are shifting to the Asian triangle. These people need the oil. The Arabs could just wake up one day and through the tools of OPEC raise oil prices to ridiculous levels, to the point that companies will no longer be able to sustain the supply. When this is done, they could give an ultimatum declaring that Israel should withdraw from Palestine, or the Arab oils will not be sold to any nation. This, when they happen, is going to stir up a national outcry against Israel, which has already started by the Arab nations and by presidents like that of Iran. But to complicate this matter, on May 9th, 1993, the Jews signed the Jerusalem Covenant. And by this covenant, they said, never would the Jews be alive to hand over the land of Israel again to any other nation. And they signed it under that which was stated in the Psalms, Psalm 137 verse 5. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skills. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. If I do not remember you, if I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy. So we already have the ingredients. We already have the prelude to World War III. And the question everybody is asking is, will it begin in the Middle East? Ezekiel had warned in chapter 38 concerning this last battle from verse 1. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Prophesy against him and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, O Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. I will bring you around, put hooks in your mouth, and bring you out with your whole army, your horses, your horsemen, fully armed, and a great horde, with large and small shields, all of them brandishing their swords. Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them, all with shields and helmets. Also Gomer with all its troops, and Beth Togarmah from the far north with all its troops, the many nations with you. These nations have been identified. Gomer is the area of Europe, Switzerland, France. Magog is still the area of the Netherlands, Poland, Austria, Hungary, Romania, Belarus, Ukraine. Gog, Rosh, Tubal, Meshech is the area of Russia, Azerbaijan, and Tarshish is the area of United Kingdom. Togarmah is the area of Armenia, Turkey. Then we have already identified the Persians, Put, the areas of Ethiopia, and that is northern Africa. And all these will be gathering together against Israel. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the chief priest, and prophesy to him. This we have already seen concerning that which the Bible has said is going to be. He said, this is what will happen in that day when Gog attacks the land of Israel. My hot anger will be aroused, declares the sovereign Lord. In my zeal and fiery wrath, I declare that at that time there shall be a great earthquake in the land of Israel. The fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the beasts of the field, every creature that moves along the ground, and all the people on the face of the earth will tremble at my presence. The mountains will overturn, the cliffs will crumble, and every wall will fall to the ground. I will summon a sword against Gog on all my mountains, declares the sovereign Lord. Every man's sword will be against his brother. I will execute judgment upon him with plague and bloodshed. I will pour down torrents of rain, hailstones, and burning sulfur on him, and on his troops, and on the many nations with him. And so I will show my greatness and my holiness, and I will make myself known in the sight of many nations. Then they will know that I am the Lord. This is in Ezekiel chapter 38 from verse 18. In 39 he continued from verse 1. Son of man, prophesy against Gog and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says, I am against you, O Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. I will turn you around and drag you along. I will bring you from the far north and send you against the mountains of Israel. Then I will strike your bow from your left hand and make your arrows drop from your right hand. On the mountains of Israel you will fall, and all your troops and the nations with you. I will give you as food to all kinds of carrion birds and to the wild animals. You will fall in the open field, for I have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. I will send fire on Magog and on those who live in safety in the coastlands, and they will know that I am God. And where will this battle take place? Verse 11 explains, on that day I will give Gog a burial place in Israel, in the valley of those who travel east towards the sea. It will block the way of travelers, because Gog and all his hordes will be buried there. So it will be called the valley of Hamon Gog. For 7 months the house of Israel will be burying them in order to cleanse the land. What is the Bible talking about? Armageddon. Armageddon comes from the Ha Megiddo. Ha means mountain. So in between the mountains of Megiddo, implying that we are talking about the plains of Megiddo. And this area till today, we find that it's an open area, and it's the only area that grants access unto Israel without people going through the mountains in the north and without going through the sea. This is the only place where a cavalry could be set, where the tankers could move in, where infantrymen will be able to gain access to the nation of Israel. So the Bible had warned about this battle. With the three aspects that we have looked at, how will this be possible? The nations are going to be democratized, and if we look at the world today, America has fulfilled its work. Most of the nations are democratized, and that is why America must also lose relevance in world politics, so that the United Nations will take over. For the United Nations is going to be the platform for the organizing of the nations, and not America. The resources, the nation of America, the policies of America were used to enhance democracy all over the world. But after that, America will lose its prominence, will lose its figure. The world role of America will drop. The United Nations will take over the role. And the man that will take over the platform of the United Nations, the Antichrist, will at that time be able to mobilize the whole world against Israel. Why so? Because the Arabs will refuse to cooperate in providing oil to the whole world. They will threaten the whole world with another sinister oil blackmail, except Israel was forced to leave Palestinian land and conform to some Arab demands. To this, Israel had already taken an oath it will not do. So this will create the platform for the Third World War, the Battle of Armageddon. Zechariah chapter 12 still spoke about this from verse 2. He said, I am going to make Jerusalem a cup that sends all the surrounding peoples reeling. Judah will be besieged, as well as Jerusalem. On that day, when all the nations of the earth are gathered against her, I will make Jerusalem an immovable rock for all the nations. All who try to move it will injure themselves. On that day, I will strike every horse with panic, and its rider with madness, declares the Lord. I will keep a watchful eye over the house of Judah, but I will blind all the horses of the nations. Then the leaders of Judah will say in their heart, the people of Jerusalem are strong, because the Lord Almighty is their God. On that day, I will make the leaders of Judah like a fire pot in a wood pile, like a flaming torch among sheaves. They will consume right and left all the surrounding peoples, but Jerusalem will remain intact in her place. This battle against Jerusalem will end up in the nations being defeated, but not by the hand of a man, but by Jesus, the Lamb of God, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, descending from heaven. Why so? Because if we understand this teaching, the relevance it has to the believers is that before the Antichrist will be revealed, before the nations are organized under the allegiance of the Antichrist, the rapture would have taken place. When the rapture takes place, the Antichrist is going to be able to come and bring peace into Israel and the Middle East. He will be able to call the Jews and the Arabs to a roundtable conference wherein there will be terms for peace. This peace formula will be tried for 7 years. But in the midst of the 7 years, in the middle of the 7 years, he is going to violate the temple. The Jews are going to pull out of the peace conference and hold on again to their terms before the peace agreement. This will force the Arabs to blackmail the world again with oil and make some other demands. And then the nations will clearly see the Jews and Jerusalem as being the cause of global crisis. And the nations will gather together to solve that problem once and for all. That will be the end of the 3.5 years after the Great Tribulation. And just when they are about to exterminate Jerusalem, the Lord will come. For Zechariah said in the same passage, verse 7, the Lord will save the dwellings of Judah first, so that the honor of the house of David and of Jerusalem's inhabitants may not be greater than that of Judah. On that day, the Lord will shield those who live in Jerusalem, so that the feeblest among them will be like David, and the house of David will be like God, like the angel of the Lord going before them. On that day, I will set out to destroy all the nations that attack Jerusalem, and I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me, the one they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for a firstborn son. On that day, the weeping in Jerusalem will be great, like the weeping of Hadad-Rimmon in the plain of Megiddo. So we know clearly where the Bible is telling us that this shall be. How will the armies be destroyed? Revelations explained in chapter 19 from verse 11. I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse, whose rider is called Faithful and True. With justice he judges and makes war. His eyes are like blazing fire, and on his head are many crowns. He had a name written on him that no one knows but he himself. He is dressed in a robe dipped in blood, and his name is the Word of God. The armies of heaven were following him, riding on white horses and dressed in fine linen, white and clean. Out of his mouth comes a sharp sword, with which to strike down the nations. He will rule them with an iron scepter. He treads the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God Almighty. On his robe and on his thigh he had his name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. This will be fulfilled at the battle of Armageddon, when the Lord will descend. And when he comes, the Jews have always been expecting that the Messiah will come. They rejected Christ as the Messiah, for though he entered through the gates of Jerusalem, they expected that he would have overthrown Pilate, cast away the colonization of the Romans. But Jesus did not do that. They rejected him as Messiah. And because the Arabs also knew that the Jews have this hope, the gates, the golden gates, wherein the Jews are expecting that one day the Messiah will walk through and take his place on Mount Zion, this same gate has been blocked. This same gate has been covered with stones, sealed with cement, so that the King of Kings will not be able to go through. But the fulfillment of this passage will come out. For in Psalm 24 verse 9 it said, Lift up your heads, O ye gates, lift them up, you ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is he, this King of glory? The Lord Almighty. He is the King of glory. The Bible says eventually Jesus will reign on Mount Zion, and many nations and powerful nations will come to Jerusalem to seek the Lord Almighty and to entreat him. This is what the Lord Almighty says. In those days, 10 men from all languages and nations will take firm hold of one Jew by the hem of his robe and say, Let us go with you, because we have heard that God is with you. This is recorded in Zechariah chapter 8 from verse 22. In Revelations again, he said, And I saw an angel coming down out of heaven, having the key to the abyss, and holding in his hand a great chain. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil, or Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. He threw him into the abyss and locked and sealed it over him, to keep him from deceiving the nations anymore until the 1,000 years were ended. After that he must be set free for a short time. I saw thrones on which were seated those who had been given authority to judge, and I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony for Jesus and because of the word of God. They had not worshipped the beast nor his image, and had not received his mark on their foreheads or their hands. they came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. These passages are implying for that which will be happening in the millennium, when Jesus descended with the saints and when he will rule on Mount Zion. So if we follow this teaching clearly, then the understanding right now is that, knowing that these are already set, the nations of the earth have been democratized, America has fulfilled its role, and with what we're already seeing around, the fall of America, the disappearance of America as a world superpower, we're already witnessing evidences of it even today. We shall look under the economic teaching to also see the economic tools that have been marshaled against the nation of America. It's the same people, they have made use of America for the democratization of the world. It is the same people, they have stirred up the crisis in the Middle East to stir it up to a proportion, to a frenzy, until it gets to a point that no other person can handle it, and at the right time they introduce the Antichrist, who will be their last card, who will be the man for the hour, who will be the man for the people, the man for the nations. But just before his prominence is revealed, the rapture will take place, and those who have faith in Christ, those whose robes have been washed by the blood of the Lamb, are going to be taken out of the world. They are going to meet with the Lord in the air. They are going to be delivered from this world. Then will the clock start ticking for 7 years. 7 years within which the world will face judgments, the bowl judgments, the trumpet judgments, the vials that the Lord will release, which will still harden the hearts of people. 7 years within which, in the middle of it, after 3.5 years, Israel will again become the problem for the nations. 7 years within which, the second half of the 7 years, the 3.5 years, the nations of the earth will face a great tribulation. The Jews will face a great tribulation, because then the war will be divided. Those who are for the Antichrist and those who are not. And those who are for him will show their allegiance by taking the mark that the Bible has told us, we shall be seen more when we look at global commerce. Then the nations of the earth will gather against Israel, and the Lord will miraculously come and deliver Israel. The question we should be asking ourselves, therefore, at this time, in view of the fact that all these things have happened and that things are ready to this proportion, the question is, if the rapture takes place today, are we ready? The aim of this teaching is not just to bring out complicated political analysis as the one we have done, but to be able to stir up within us the passion and the zeal to keep our robes white and to ensure that our heads lack no oil, so that when the trumpet sounds, we shall indeed not be found wanting. May this be our portion, that we shall have the inheritance of the saints, that we shall not miss it, that we shall be among those who have an inheritance, among those who are sanctified. This is our calling. This should be our mission on earth. This, we pray, should be our testimony eventually when everything is folded. This I also pray for those who are listening and watching this presentation. In Jesus' name, amen.